Peter, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitar. Thank you, Gegana, for inviting me and having me given the opening speech of today. A short introduction of myself and my background. Peter Kapitein, I'm a patient advocate. You could say a patient advocate by necessity. In 2005, I was diagnosed with a lymphoma. Had several relapses, one in 2006, 2007, 2008, and then in 2008 I needed a bone marrow transplant to get the cancer under control. That is how I prefer to call it. I have an incurable disease, lymphoma, but it's 100% under control and 100% quality of life. Well, as Dimitar stated, I found it together with a good friend of me, Inspired to Live in 2010. And we started working on the question for patients, what is your biggest problem? It's a simple question, and be aware there is a difference between simple and easy. Some things are very simple, but not easy to solve or easy to achieve. But the basic question is, what is your biggest problem? And in 2000 and in the first years, we had discussions with physicians, researchers about that question. What is the biggest problem for cancer patients here in the Netherlands? I live in Amsterdam. In that brainstorm session, we decided, because there are a lot of problems, of course, we decided to do something about fatigue. A lot of patients who are diagnosed with cancer either are suffering from fatigue or become very fatigued from the treatments. So we started an initiative which is called A-Care, which was for cancer rehabilitation. That was at that moment what we thought the biggest problem that we could solve here in the Netherlands. Approximately 2.5 years ago, we decided to expand our focus from Europe, North America, you could say from mostly rich countries to low and middle income countries. And I can still remember in April 2020 when Ilona, one of our patient advocates, and me had a conversation with Kamarogo, a well-known oncologist in Kenya. We asked him that simple question, what is your biggest problem? And he told us, well, almost all patients in Kenya, and that counts for most sub-Saharan countries, come into the hospital with stage 4 cancer. Our biggest problem is palliative care, pain management. So what we realized is that the biggest problem is pretty different from what area, what country of the world you are living in. A lot of problems we experienced can be solved. 2.5 years ago, we went global. Every last Wednesday of the month, which was also yesterday, we come together around a certain topic and we discuss, and a lot of problems are discussed in these sessions. A lot of problems can be solved. Sometimes it's even easy to solve a problem. Most of the times it's not easy, but bringing together the right people makes it possible to solve even complex problems. But what we realized in the past years is that quite often we know how to solve a problem. We want to solve that problem, but we still do not act upon it. Why are we not doing what we want to do, what we can do? Why are we not doing the right thing for patients? So I've worked for many years in the financial industry, central banking, and my experience in that industry was that more or less the same problem is in the financial industry. And a good friend of mine in 2015, I think it was, said, I think you should study the military industrial complex. Well, that's a kind of a weird question for someone who works in the financial industry and someone who works in the medical industry as a patient advocate. But after Googling a couple of times on military-industrial complex, I became aware of a famous speech of President Eisenhower, who talked about the military-industrial complex, armed forces, industry, and government working together in a way that did not necessarily benefit the safety of the American people. And suddenly I became aware that there is also a medical industrial complex in which all the stakeholders, industry, government, physicians, researchers, the payers, but also patient advocacy organization, work together in a way that does not always benefit the patient. And a lot of people, and me as well, hope that there is a simple cause for these problems. So when we see this problem, we think of bad doctors or criminal pharma. By doing a lot of research on that, I became aware that that is not the cause. Yes, there is every now and then someone in pharma who has not the good intentions, but most people who work in pharma want to do good. Most doctors want to do good. Almost everybody in the whole medical industry wants to do good. But what I saw and what is happening is that we drift away from the essence of what our work should be. And that's what I call distraction. Distraction from the essence of our work. Yeah, of course, in our situation, that is doing good and improve the benefit, improve the quality of life of patients. So if you conclude that there is a distraction from the essence of what we should do and what we need to do, there are two questions important. What causes that, and how do you solve it? And the last one, of course, is the most important one. How do you solve it? When there is distraction from the essence, I think that we, patients and patient advocates, should realize that if we do not step into that problem, it will not be solved. And why do I say that pretty blunt? Well, that is because it is our problem. It is not the problem of industry, of research, of doctors, of regulators. It is our problem. And if I give my personal example, I have a lymphoma. That is my problem. I need my physician. I need industry for delivering the right treatments. I need research to improve the quality of treatments, but it's still my problem. And I think if there is distraction from the essence of healthcare, we drifted away from doing the right thing for patients. There is a responsibility at patients and patient advocates to make it our problem and to solve that problem. Well, let me give an example. And the example is around data. In 2011, February 2011, I gave a speech in Toronto about patient data. And Stephen Friend, a good friend of me, said after that, I think, Peter, you should give that presentation more and quite often, and you should call it, That's My Data. And suddenly I realized 2011, yeah, it's my data. It is my data, and I should be the one who decides upon the use of it. But looking at the data problem, we can only conclude one thing, and that is that we do not own the data. If you look at industry, when we are in a trial, we sign an informed consent, which makes it the data of industry. I think there is almost no patient who knows that she or he signs for giving away her or his data, but the data is legally owned by industry, used by researchers for science. The same counts. It is not owned by patients, but it is, morally spoken, from an ethical perspective, our data. Well, how could that happen? I think the main cause is that we simply do not realize when we become a patient after a diagnosis, that data is so important for the solution. After a couple of years, some patients, patient advocates realize the importance of data for doing better research, for making better treatments with the need of researchers and industry. But we simply say, well, of course you need my data, use it for diagnostics, etc., etc. But we should become aware, again, that it is our data. And now you see that the data has drifted away from a human topic into a legal topic. We see lawyers discussing data and privacy and realize that in these discussions, almost never patients are at the table for discussions. It is our data, not legally maybe, but morally for sure. We're talking about privacy, the risks that there are with the use of data. But if we talk about risks, we talk about my risk as a patient, the risk of patients. Isn't it strange that in that situation, something very important is discussed without the presence of the ones who should own the data? And again, that is not bad intentions of lawyers, of industry, of scientists who are using the data, who are regulating the data. It's simply the way we work. See at a lot of conferences, if there are patients, patient advocates who give presentations about important topics in healthcare. This biotech is really an exception with 3 days of conference and 1 day of patients, patient advocates giving talks, lectures, presentations. Most conferences about healthcare, so about patients, have one speaker with a patient background. But there are many conferences about healthcare and patients without patients. So, and again, that is not bad intention. It's simply we forget to invite them, we forget to take them seriously, and we patient advocates do not stand up and say, hey, you're talking about me. If about us, not without us. So if you want to discuss healthcare, you discuss it with us. And otherwise, we will not cooperate with you. We will find someone else that can help us save our problems. So if we look at the data problem, we should make it our problem. So if it is our data, we should make data and the problem around it our problem. I think that counts for all in healthcare related to patients. We should make it our problem. And as long as we do not make it our problem, it will not be solved, or it will only be solved in the long term. If we dive a little bit deeper into the data topic and the privacy topic, then we're talking about risks. I already mentioned that. But what is the risk? And is there a balance between risks and benefits? Risks is always the multiplier of impact and chance. Is there a chance that there goes something wrong with the data? And if there goes something wrong with the data, what is the impact? And then you should balance the risk with the benefit. What we almost every time forget are the hidden costs of saying no. So being compliant to regulations, which is a good thing, but be aware that being compliant can mean that we do harm to patients. If we do not use the data that is used by industry, that is used by scientists, in a way that benefits the patient, we harm the patient. So that balance between risks and the benefits, that should be discussed and put into a new perspective, so that we do not forget what I call the hidden costs of saying no. If you say no, we cannot use the data because of regulation, that has consequences, and the consequences needed to be taken into account. And if they are not taken into account, we patient advocates should stand up and say, you're talking about my data, we have to take it into account. A little more on the risks of data. Let me start with the question, do we trust banks? Most people start laughing when I ask, do you trust banks? As I told in my introduction, I work also in the financial industry. Do you trust banks? People start laughing. No, of course we do not trust banks. Okay, but where is your money? Probably on a saving account of a bank. So you give your money to an institution that you do not trust. And I think that we all trust, maybe not banks, but we trust the whole regulation and concept of the financial industry, because we know if something goes wrong with a bank or a pension fund or an insurance company, we get our money back. And that is what you could call checks and balances. The checks and balances in the financial industry are in place. We are in a very difficult time at this moment. High interest rates, higher interest rates, high inflation. But what we see is that the financial industry is taking care of that. You can argue with me if they do the right things, but the checks and balances were in place and now are being taken in place. That is exactly the same with data. I think that the risks that we patients might have from misuse of data are very limited. When a scientist misuses the data, his career is simply down the drain, or at least harmed much. Industry, I think in industry the checks and balances can be improved, because there are situations where they violate the privacy. Fines are being applied and paid. But I think industry can improve. Not that it's going bad in industry, but it can be improved. In the world of science, I see not much very misuse of data. So checks and balances are in place, mostly can be improved. And if you ask patients, can we use your data? Maybe one or two exceptions, but more than 95% of the patients, all surveys show that want to share their data. If you ask a citizen, by the way, it's around 50-60%. And I think the difference between a citizen and patient is urgency. Patients need the data to be used by research for better treatments, for better quality of life. And citizens are not aware of that yet. Having said that, as an example of what went wrong in the past decades, the distraction of the essence, with the example of data, there is only one solution. Maybe there are more, but I know of one. And that is bring back the patient in the position where she or he is at the table discussing important topics. What is important in your situation? Discussing important topics. Make it our problem and bring at the table the right people, the right stakeholders to solve this problem. And these stakeholders are research institutes, industry, physicians, regulators, payers. But if you bring them at the table, I think we are closer to a solution than when we wait for the right answers of the other stakeholders, because the interests of these stakeholders are by definition different from the interest of patients. So if you want to solve the problem of patients, whether it's in my country, the Netherlands, or in Kenya, or in Armenia, or in Brazil, Argentina, the United States, countries where Inspire to Live has a wonderful footprint in every situation. What's the biggest problem? Solve that by making it your own problem as a patient advocate. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Peter. That was really inspiring, and I love the message of your talk. If you want it to be solved, just make it your own problem.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, you start your talk with a simple question. What is your biggest problem? And I would like to ask you, what is the biggest problem of patient advocacy of today? It's probably different for different countries, for different organizations, for different disease areas. But if you could think of one or, for example, top three things, what would they be?
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter in what country we act as patient advocates. The problems are different, but the underlying issue is always we do not execute what we already know. So if there is a problem, whether it's palliative care and pain management in Kenya, the example that I gave, or here in the Netherlands, I'm involved in getting patients sequenced. The underlying problem is we do not execute what we already know. And I learned that in 2010 from Sir David Lane, who made that expression. And I think that is one of the pillars of Inspire to Live. Execute what you already know. And for that reason, we brought in our organization people who know what they are talking about. That is my definition of the patient advocates in Inspire to Live. They know what they're talking about. So we have molecular biologists, we have physicians, we have epidemiologists, we have people with a legal background, people with a financial background, industry, people working in industry are part of Inspire to Live. So all the stakeholders in the medical industrial complex are in Inspire to Live. So that if we have a comment on a problem and say, hey, you should do research on that topic because that is of importance for patients, or hey, industry, I think you only work for 1.2 billion people in the world and the 6.6 billion people in low and middle income countries. Well, they're not on your radar. If you tell people that they should do their work in another and a better way, you have to know what you're talking about, because otherwise they won't take you seriously. So execute what we already know is the underlying issue that counts for every country.
Yes, absolutely agree. So yes, I was planning to ask almost every participant in today's session, what is patient advocacy regarding their point of view, their personal point of view, outside the books, outside the official definitions, and you've already answered this question that patient advocates are people who are knowing what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Did I got it correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a good example. I learned a lot from the HIV/AIDS activists, from the ACT UP movement starting in the United States, coming to Europe and other continents in the world. And they did exactly what I described. And so it's not something that I made up or something. No, it's what the guys like Peter Staley and Larry Kramer started. Peter Staley was, well, we have some similarities. Peter Staley was also working in the financial industry. And in that excellent documentary, How to Survive a Plague, you hear him say, and that was the moment I decided to become a patient advocate. And I needed to know what I was talking about. And then his counterpart, who is still active, Tony Fauci, still active in the CDC from NIH in the United States. In the same document, Fauci says, these guys from ACT UP knew exactly how we worked. They know what they are talking about. And I think that is very, very important, because if you, and then I repeat myself, if you want to be taken seriously, people need to see, hey, she knows exactly how we work. and she can improve the way we work. And then you're in a discussion, and then you cooperate, because that is a very important element of patient advocacy as well. You have to knock on doors very hard, but you have to cooperate. You cannot solve the problems on your own. That's
Great messages, Peter. Thank you. It's real pleasure and honor always to have you around.
my pleasure as well. Thank you very much, Gegana.
Thank you. You will be around in the next session.